kindly, Brother Ragland. It's a privilege indeed to stand before this august body of people. And let me first of all say beware of preachers who walk to the podium with a Bible in their hand, or they may be subject to preach. But I'm going to be very good today. I'm not going to do that. I just want to use a scriptural reference a little bit later. But I'm highly honored, first of all, to be in the midst of a tremendous group of dynamic people at the table at which I was sitting. Not only Mr. Michael Johnson, who you have already heard speak on a few things that they do. I was quite excited to hear about his organization and what they're doing for Alzheimer's disease. And also one of my colleagues in the gospel here, Pastor Meg Reynolds. He's one of the young dynamic leaders coming from a group of family preachers, PKs as we call them, pastors' kids. And he's doing a tremendous yeoman's job at that outstanding Oakley Full Gospel Baptist Church. And then also, I was quite privileged to meet another dynamic gentleman from the Alzheimer's Association. And by the way, to the Alzheimer's Association, we applaud you for facilitating this lunch and learning opportunity for so many of us. And I had no idea to the degree in which this took place, but I think this august body should give Alzheimer's Association a warm hand of applause for what they do. Oh, we can do better than that. But that was for me time. But for this organization, let's give it up for them. Come on, let's do it well. Come on, come on. Amen. If we only understood the enormity of problems that emerge from this particular problem, you can then further appreciate why I have high regard for this organization. And then finally, I am really blessed to see a couple of people here that I look forward to just sharing with you. One of them, first of all, is the love of my life, my sweetheart and my dearest friend, Lady Elaine Lundy. Won't you stand, sweetie? She came here to encourage me. And another distinguished woman of God that I have great regard for a number of years, one of the former assistant pastors of the Church of Christ of Apostolic Faith. And those of you who know that church, not only have we celebrated our centennial anniversary last year, 100 years is a long time, but it took people like this woman I'm getting ready to introduce you to that stepped up and facilitated and assisted to one of the pastors speaking at this time. And she's a dynamic woman, not only a preacher and a teacher. She's traveled around the country doing great things with regards to facilitating people's comprehension of the power of the Holy Spirit. And further, she has a sensitivity of counseling people who have dire challenges. And she helps them to not only recognize God as the answer, but more importantly, she also lets them know that there are people who love you enough to support you. I speak of none other than Evangelist Naomi Cecily, who's sitting in the rear. Won't you please stand, Evangelist Cecily? Just stand. Amen. And if I've forgotten anyone, please forgive me. I just really want to get down to the business at hand. But this is very, very, very serious business. I find it difficult sometimes to comprehend the magnitude of challenges that families and patients, persons who have difficult and challenging problems. I've been given an assignment. I'm going to follow it as meticulously as I can. I'm going to try to leave at the end a few moments for questions and answering, but let me first of all give you a sense of where we're going to go. I'd like to address at least 3 major risk factors for dementia, specifically the vascular type. Secondly, I want to help you to appreciate risk prevention, risk factors that lead to this disease, and prevention strategies that will help perhaps eliminate them from developing in the first place. The healthcare professionals, the researchers, are finding it very difficult to come up with appropriate therapeutic interventions that will control some of the manifestations that we see in Alzheimer's patients. The study with the omega-3 fatty acids, as extensive as it was, and in many research studies like that one over the past 20 years, have only allowed us to just tap into some of the dynamics clinically that this problem produces. And even in the most recent Journal of American Medical Association, they were just giving us some news that the problem, although we're getting a better understanding, the treatment and the cure is still further on down the road. So those of you who know how to pray, continue to pray for the researchers to come up with an answer to this tremendous problem. And then finally, we're going to deal with how to really manage these kinds of individuals with dementia, Alzheimer's being the most common cause of it. It is a complex problem, and I would like to just walk down some of the areas of which the church, the community of healthcare professionals, the organizations that support many of the community facilities that reach out to people with these kinds of problems, such as the Alzheimer's Association, even hospice. It's very tricky to get into a hospice facility because it's very difficult for us to predict when these kinds of persons with Alzheimer's have the tendency to get very ill and yet bounce right back. So we cannot predict when they're going to have 6 months left to live. We can't really do that even with other patients who are referred to hospice. And it shouldn't frighten us because hospice is an organization which I've sat on the board with Riverside Methodist Hospital's Colbecker House for a number of years. And I found out how important it is for you to have some of the resources that they can avail to you. But on the other hand, when it comes to Alzheimer's patients or dementia patients, it's hard to predict or prognosticate when these patients are going to have this kind of qualifications to be provided by the Hospice Association's resources and benefits. So we'll touch on that just a little bit. And but first of all, let me again thank you for the invitation, and I'm going to just flow with what I have prepared for you, and then, as I mentioned, we'll have a few questions. Some people may or may not know what dementia really is. We know what it sounds like, we know what it looks like, we see the behavior that describes it, but we really don't quite understand the full dynamics of this major problem. And I'm going to touch on at least sensitizing you to the most important of all the people that take care of these patients, and that is the caregiver, the family. They have to really deal with the complexity of the manifestations of this problem. And we will touch on that in just a few moments. But dementia, as some or maybe all may know, is when a person's ability, a decline in their cognitive, mental abilities to remember, to react to their environment, problem solving, is very complicated for these patients. Forgive me, I'm a doctor and I keep calling people patients and I shouldn't do that. So forgive me if I continue to do it. It's just a frame, a reference, and habit that I've been using for 40 years, so it's hard to break. But in any event, further, their ability to make sound decisions, judgments, when it comes to perhaps doing certain things, depending on what level of dementia they do have. Their ability to pay attention to certain areas of involvement, such as even driving automobiles. They are not always clear on whether the light is red or green, or whether they should turn right or left, even though they know their way home. They don't make those decisions in real time. So it's a challenge. And then there's impairments in their personality. You may have this person who has a jovial outlook on life, and then at times they seem to be somebody you really don't recognize because they become a little bit agitated and they have a tendency to argue with you and fuss with you, and sometimes they may even get a little bit physical. So this change does occur. Dementia can develop slowly. In young people with a different underlying diagnosis, their cause is different. But that of the Alzheimer's type of dementia, it's a slow process. And the changes are sometimes very subtle and may take years to manifest itself. So dementia is something that we all have to deal with at some point in time, whether in our professions, in our communities, in our homes. And one of the important things that I would like to convey in this message today is to eliminate this quote-unquote stigma that is attached to people who have dementia. It's like no other sickness. Everybody who's sick needs medical attention, they need help, and as a result, we need to recognize that they need the support of family, healthcare professionals, without attaching a stigma to them. And within our Afro-American community, we feel sometimes even ashamed to take our patients, our parishioners, our family, our friends who have dementia out into the public because we can't predict what kind of behavior will be demonstrated. We need to become comfortable with the fact that there are some medications that help, certainly not a cure, but some of the risk factors can be controlled to reduce some of these symptoms. And so you should always feel comfortable with the fact that this is a medical problem. And so let me first of all deal with some of the important risk factors that lead to dementia. Some of you perhaps will recognize that these are the same risk factors that leads to the development of coronary artery disease, cardiac heart disease, including strokes, cerebral vascular disease, and these problems can be dynamic. And so the first series of risk factors that I'd like to share with you are those risk factors that can be managed. First of all, cigarette smoking. I'm not sure how loud our country can speak to the notion that cigarette smoking not only can cause cancer, but it also is a risk factor for coronary artery disease. And people will die quicker of coronary artery disease than they do of cancer. And that is why we need to make the clarion call that smoking is very, very damaging. Let me just give you a brief statistic here, and I won't give you a lot of statistics to bore you with that, but just to give you a sense that a smoker's risk of a heart attack is twice that of a non-smoker. And that also confers over to Alzheimer's. Smokers will develop at some point in time, sooner than others, this problem of dementia. Because smoking affects one of the dynamic reasons for which this problem emerges, and that is it's a vascular problem.